right.
Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. Our 5G reception is complete. We've both got our shots.
Doubled. We got both our second shots.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we're not wearing masks today.
Yeah. Oh, man. You even don't have glasses. It fixed your eyes. It's incredible. Look
That's
out.
true, yeah. I can actually see through the wall over here. It's really cool.
Yeah, I'll just take listening to the strange voices in my head. They're just clearer now.
I think it's really nice that everybody gets different powers from it.
Mm-hmm. It's like the what are those Terra crystals or whatever from the Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You ever watch that?
I did. Once Daisy got her powers, which it was cool, like leading up to that point,
Yeah.
and then it just like the show was a little hard for me after that.
Yeah, I got it into like the 5th season, and then I just didn't care anymore. You know, same thing with Falcon and well, I mean, not that Falcon and Winter Soldier has lots of episodes, but I watched the first one and I'm like, meh. I'm just done.
Yeah, so I did. I am up to date on that one. It's more like I had a Sunday. We had a kind of a busy weekend, and so Sunday I finally just like 5 o'clock. Everyone just wanted to like, not do anything in the house, and so what I not did was sit on the couch and caught up on that.
Is it worth catching up on?
The last episode was definitely the best one.
Okay.
In terms of like, it kind of got interesting or whatever. I don't know. It's not. It's exactly what I expected from that show. Where, like WandaVision was like you never knew what to expect, even if you thought you knew what you expected. It was interesting, and it was just like cinematically, like the way it looked and like all the period things they did, and then the little nostalgia things, like. And the acting and everything was just top notch. I feel like in WandaVision.
Yep.
Where the acting or whatever, it's like, it's okay. The production quality is great.
Yeah.
It looks like a movie. But it's just kind of, it's not that interesting. Like the characters are okay, I guess, but there's no real like nemesis or whatever that's well. I don't know. Like I feel like we've talked about this before, like with the Netflix series Marvel comic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that had a very strong villain were awesome.
Yep.
They were so good. And then the ones that had like a very uninteresting flat villain, they're not very watchable.
Defenders of New York, like they were leading up to this huge thing, and then like Sigourney Weaver's character comes in, and you're kind of like, who? And I didn't care.
But at least she was okay, and then when she was gone,
like,
she could have been something. Like, at least she's a good actress, or whatever. And then they, like, with a spoiler alert, I guess, but they take her out relatively quickly, and then you're like, there's, like, nothing. There's nobody interesting at all.
I mean, the last season of Daredevil was absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. They finally gave Kingpin just as much time as Daredevil, and he's awesome. What's his face?
They did just a phenomenal job with that. I loved that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know how the heck they're going to top it. So as disappointing as it was that they weren't continuing the series, it's kind of nice to end on that much of a high note.
So high, yeah.
It's like, maybe not touching this is a good idea. So
that was my problem. Like, I think the Punisher character was pretty interesting, but gosh, I don't even think I finished the show. That series.
I thought the first season was great, and I didn't bother with the second season. Jessica Jones, I think I watched all 3 of them. I definitely watched the first season, and the second season, I think...
I never finished the third season. There's 3, right?
I think there's a third one.
Is there 2 or 3? I can't remember.
Because all I remember is there was Hargrave, or...
Kilgrave,
yeah. I'm like, Hargrave is not right.
And he was awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
That was a great show, the first season. Yeah.
Second season with like her mom was just kind of like, this is kind of boring.
That's right.
Like I'm hoping for something interesting, but it's like, all right, I'll just slog through this because I got ready for Defenders of New York that way. And then the third season I didn't even bother to start because
it's the third season. I didn't finish it. It was like her friend or whatever.
Yeah, I know they tried to bring in that cat. Like reflex character thing for what's her face, the blonde girl in it, but I just stopped I lost interest in them all.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yep. Anyways,
so I guess maybe we should talk about guitar. Yeah.
So how does Daredevil play guitar? Like Jeff Healey, or
why would you say that? Because he's blind?
Yeah. Jeff Healey was blind and played phenomenal guitar. In fact, he did stuff nobody else can do because he had 5 fingers on the fretboard. So we're stuck, you know. I'll never get over seeing him the first time, like on a video or whatever. I was like, you've got it. That's just unreal. Like that level of approach. And though, like his phrasing and outside of the, you know, you could call it a physical disability without being able to see. But what he did with the guitar in terms of that was just like huge. Like he didn't have the same socially reinforced norms of guitar because he just never saw one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It just kind of taking it like, okay, he's never seen it, so he's holding it in his lap and he's playing it, you know, this way and stuff like that. And he's got these huge chordal stretches that he can do and voicings that are just completely inaccessible for the rest of us. And created his own thing, and it was awesome. Like I love. It's too bad he passed away. But that's kind of like, you know, to kind of like chime in a little bit more down that thing of like, does the blindness affect things in a potential positive way? Because the way that you're looking at it is not, again, socially reinforced. That's the only way I can think of is that.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
So yeah, like, go ahead.
Oh no, keep going.
No, I was going to say, like, you have that kind of situation with Rodrigo as well, the classical composer, because he was legally blind. You know, whenever he was writing something, he was, like, you know, super close to the score, getting in there. And rumor had it that he, like, only touched a guitar one time, which makes sense because a lot of his writing has some voicings that are like, really? Like, you're going to do that to us?
Maybe the pencil slipped.
Yeah, no. There's too much consistency in the difficulty level to count it with that level of it was definitely intentional. It wasn't a mistake. There are no mistakes like that. So the only guy that would do the mistake stuff would be Tedesco, and his writing like is phenomenal for guitar. He like had voicings that were literally impossible. Like you'd have to like some of this, a substantial portion of his writing, you'd have to go like, yeah, I'm dropping this note, and I'm dropping it, because you had to do something. It was just impossible to play it all. And it was cool stuff, but, you know, that's just kind of like what you run into. And that's the advantage of getting stuff composed by somebody that's never played the instrument, and the disadvantage. In one way, they think in a completely different way. And another way is they think in a completely different way. So you don't know what you're going to get. Almost like Stravinsky with I think it was the Rite of Spring, or maybe the Firebird Suite, where he had a chord on the violin, and the violinists are like, that's impossible. How do you play it? And they hand it, and he's like, show me the violin. And he's like, I play it like this. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I guess that's how we do it. You know,
yeah, sure.
And as much as I'm a fan of Stravinsky, I'm not an autobiographical fan of it. Or a biographical fan of him that much.
I sent you that link to those like cartoon things. Did you watch any of those? Have you seen those?
Wait, the cartoons or the toy orchestra?
No, that's something different.
Okay,
two different things. So there's this like toy orchestra of the Rite of Spring thing that's awesome.
That
like
was
squeeze
really...
toys. Yeah. But it's just like, yeah.
that had me crying.
It's only like, it's like 30 seconds, but it's wonderful.
Oh, it's
no,
great.
There's another link I sent you this week. I found some page, and it should be way more popular because they're awesome. It's like all the stories about these famous pieces, and Rite of Spring.
Okay, the 1812 Overture. Yeah, I forgot to watch that.
So the Rite of Spring one's really good. I just happened to be on the 1812 one, is the one I sent you. Mm-hmm. And there's only like 15 or so. They must take a little while to make them, but they're pretty funny. And they're well done, and they tell you about the history of these pieces. But the Rite of Spring one was kind of interesting, which makes me wonder if it is what you were talking about, because they're kind of like joking about it too. Like Stravinsky brought it to the orchestra, and they're like, the musicians are all like, this is wrong, you made all these typos. And he's like, no, they're not, you know. There's all this tension. And it was leading up to the fact that there was like the biggest riot. Oh yeah, or, you know, the first time they showed it.
Burned down the opera house.
Yeah, and which actually led in. It was the opening of the Opera House, right? Is that what you said? Yeah. It's like
Not that, I don't know if it was the opening, but they
I'm pretty
burned up.
sure it was like the first thing there or something.
So this whole angry reaction to music isn't anything new.
So I think there was a social class thing, which is the reason why there was things. So like the Bohemians were down at the bottom, and the Aristocrats were up at the top, and they were the really rich, wealthy, artsy or whatever, high society. They were booing it, but then like the Bohemians were cheering for it, and they were instructed to not stop playing. There's also a ballet with it that was really weird and different, right?
Well, it's the rite of spring. I mean, it's basically about human sacrifice. So it's
So
not.
I don't know if it was all the music, I guess is what my point was, because like the high society was expecting like typical ballerina sort of thing, and here they were doing like, I don't know, there was all kinds of interesting things about it, but
Well, yeah, the human sacrifice thing. It's like the first death metal album performed live.
But even like their posture and stuff, like they weren't using like proper ballet posture and all these kind of things, where they put their heads, and they never like, these are like things you don't do, the rules. So I don't know if it was all against the music. If I think it was like a combination of both, because they talk about in that video too. I think it didn't become a success till it was like the ballet part of it wasn't shown with it. As soon as it was just the music, people seemed to like accept it or something.
That's interesting.
But yeah, the musicians were, I guess, were complaining about it not being right. So that's how I got there.
Yep. No, that makes sense. I mean, whenever something is that, I mean, it was groundbreaking. It basically tore up every convention that you could possibly think of.
I love that piece.
It's phenomenal.
It's like a piece you can spend the rest of your life like diving into all the little nuances of it and still not know it.
Yeah,
all the way.
Something new to discover, which is kind of like the question is like, did he know there was that much nuance going on, or is that just his style where he was just like, it's just like what I do, type of thing? Because this may be semi apocryphal, but I remember reading something or watching a video on him where he would basically like, he'd be sitting down to write, but he wouldn't sit there and write like, in the sense of linearly all the time. He would sit there on a piano and like come up with these chords and then write the chord in, and then come up with another chord and write the chord and then connect them with that. And, everybody's got their compositional quirks in terms of how they come up with something.
But he was a tinkerer, right? Like he wasn't Mozart who just like heard it and then wrote it down and it was perfect or whatever. First pass, he was like, let me try this, and then like a couple of weeks later he might be like, I think I'm gonna change that note. That I think this would work better, or maybe I'll use that chord over here or something. Instead. It's interesting. Kind of skipping around a second, but like they talked about the different types of geniuses. I think we talked about this before.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Like the younger geniuses, the like child prodigies, they tend to be the type that like they're not tinkerers. They're more like absolutist or something, where like a Mozart, it's like, well, this is the way it is. They're not gonna change it. Like, what would I change? Like, this is just the way it is. That's how it's supposed to be. Where the like later, like people or like the late geniuses who aren't child prodigies tend to be tinkerers, and they're constantly modified. I'm trying to remember what the artists were, because they were talking about painters. I don't know if it was Cezanne. One of them, it's like you can find like 70 versions of a painting before you get to like the one that's famous, and there's like 70 different versions before you get there. Where like Picasso or something, it's like there's only one. Like there's only one of that thing. They never tried to make it another one like it, or didn't like try to learn anything from it. It just was what it was. And I'm probably messing up, and Picasso might be the other way around, but I feel like he wasn't. So it's like some people are like, this is the way it is. It's perfect, sort of, already. And other people are like, well, I need to work on this for 40 years before I'm ready to show you what it is.
It's like Koskin when he wrote the or Koskin, however you pronounce his last name, when he wrote the Prince's Toys. It was a decade-long thing. Yeah. It took him 10 years to write it. Then kind of like to jump in with that meme that you sent me about the Tool. It's like I did sit around with the Drop D for an hour. There's no way that the new Tool album 13 years to write. Oh my gosh, dude! I almost spit out my coffee. That was just, it's great. I love poking fun at stuff like that, and that was just perfect. Perfect.
But actually, Tool would, I mean, at least the way they presented that last album makes me think they're not tinkerers, really. Not in that same sense. They're formulaic in that they took an idea that they came up with 30 years ago and haven't changed it much, like sort of intentionally. Where like Radiohead or something's like they're total tinkerers, Mm-hmm. And in fact, they probably don't even play. I don't know this for sure, but I doubt that if they played Creep or something like that, there's no way they play it the way that it is on the record.
Oh, like, I can't imagine.
It's completely changed at this point, and they have some weird version of it, or weird, I say weird, but an evolved version of that song than what they would have played 30 years ago. But if Tool played a song from 30 years ago, they would play it exactly like they did 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about.
I wonder if that's a genre to an extent. Not that I'm discounting the improvisation.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that Radiohead would be improvising necessarily.
Yeah, that's what I was immediately going there. It's like I can't see them doing like crazy improvisation with those huge moogs or whatever they got up on stage, and just kind of like winging it.
I would think that at least my impression of them is they would say, "Oh, we should redo the way we do that verse. Remember how in the verse we did this thing? Like, what if we instead of and then they can sort of recompose it, and not so much like just wing it. I don't think they're winging it in the sense of
jam band.
Let's see what like every night it's different. I bet that's not it. I bet it's like if you cut it every 5 years. It's something they did for a year, but after a year they rearranged it, and they rearranged it until eventually sounds probably nothing like the original. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah, what was it? U2 used to open their concerts as a country band covering their own songs.
Nice.
Like they would just come out and just like do these countrified versions of everything, and then they walk backstage for a half hour or so, and then come out as the actual band and do the official concert, which is like that's kind of cool. Like just to take that much liberty with stuff, that would be a lot of fun.
That's fun.
Anyway, so how do we even get to this point?
And the thing I was gonna say before was you were talking about how being blind has some advantages, disadvantages, or whatever. I was talking to my daughter about how people hear voices in their head. Like we all hear like a voice in our head when we're like talking, and some people don't hear voices in their head. Mm-hmm. And then I've seen these discussions like on Facebook or something, and somebody said, well, when you read, don't you hear like a voice in your head? And they're like, no, you do. You do. And I was saying, well, and my daughter was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How do they know? Like, you have to read in your head, right? And I'm like, does a deaf person read in there? Can they read? And she said, yeah. And I'm like, if they've never heard a voice in their life, do you think they read the words aloud in their head? Mm-hmm. And of course they don't. They don't even know what it would sound like.
Yeah.
They have no comprehension of what it would sound like, but they can still read. Mm-hmm. And actually, they've done study, like people who are deaf read like 10 times faster than people who are not. Mm-hmm. Because they're not boggled down by going like, the car went to the market. Which market? Yeah.
And that was one of the things Julie made me do is like a reading test, because she was always getting frustrated that we'd start a book together and I'd be like 50 to 100 pages ahead of her in the same session. She's like, what the heck? So she made me take a speed reading test. And apparently I'm like in the top 1% of, whatever that speed reading thing is in terms of speed and retention, which was the big thing. They're like, the retention is the big thing. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. It was like, read this thing, answer a bunch of these questions. And the faster you better. So I was also in a competitive mode too. It's not like
you were focused and you had the right amount of coffee and everything that day.
Yeah, it was like, all right, I'm gonna do this to see how quick I can really read, like put effort into it, rather than what I consider my casual reading pace, where it's just kind of, I can read generally quick, but seeing that, it was like, holy cow. Okay, I guess when I decide to really just kind of go, and it's not like I'm reading each individual word. It's like the paragraphs are like stamped.
Yeah, sure.
It's just like type of thing. So it's whatever. I don't want to get side topic on speed reading or all that stuff. But I get.
Well, that's one of those, like, the more you read, the more that helps too. I know, like.
Oh yeah.
When I never really liked reading until I was 19 or so, really, at all. It is because I moved to New York City and I was on the subway, and I used to ride the subway like an hour to work.
Yeah.
And this was before like your phones had anything more than like maybe one little like crappy game on it or something, right?
The Snake or whatever.
Yeah, and you had a CD players and everything. It's not like you had endless music. So I remember I got books, and then at first I really was slow at it, but then it didn't take very long before, it might take like 2-3 weeks to finish a book, like, 500-page book or something. Till eventually I was finishing like 3 or 4 books a week, because like one day, like 2 hours you could finish like 300 pages or something. Once you get to like practiced at it.
Yeah, and there is a big variance in terms of the depth of the reading. The more technical stuff,
sure.
The breaks go on versus, if it's a sci-fi or a regular novel, it's like...
Unless it's Dune, like the...
Yeah, where it combines both.
I think it was Jeremy. I was like, he started it, and he was like, "Oh, this is kind of like a lot of work."
Yeah.
I'm like, once you get 100 pages in, it starts to like, you've learned everything you needed to. Now you can actually like, kind of get through it quick. Mm-hmm. But that first 100 pages of Dune, when you haven't read any of it, it's like, wait, what name was that with 17 consonants in it?
Yep. But I love those types of books.
Oh yeah.
It's like a lot kind of set up, and then all of a sudden you can see the pieces play after that.
Yeah, and eventually you get in like cruise control.
Yep.
But for a while there, you're like, I don't know if I'm going to finish this book. I've always meant to read Ulysses too.
Yeah, that's a monster.
And I know a big part of that is like the context of it too. Like you can't just read it. Like you need to know like historical and political facts and stuff like that. But I've tried to read it twice. The first time I was way not ready. The second time I think I could have read it, but then I actually started it last year. Because when I travel, I read a lot. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm flying. And I was like, I had been reading a lot and I had been traveling a lot. So I had a lot of reading time. So I was like, my reading chops were really good. And I'm like, okay, I think I can do it. And I got about 100 pages in, I think. And I was keeping up with it. But then I didn't travel anymore. And then, like at home, it's hard to get time. And
yeah. I usually read at night before I go to bed, probably about a half hour, 45 minutes. I don't know, because like my rule is once I'm in bed, I don't have any electronics with me. If they're all off to the side, I have no clue what time it is. I'm just kind of like doing my thing. Otherwise, I don't necessarily sleep well. So it's, what's the way to put it? It's, I don't know how long I'm reading, but I generally, like, if I'm in a casual reading mode, it's usually a book a week. Nice. It's like how I'll fly through it. But it all depends on what I'm reading. So right now I'm reading, what am I reading? I am reading a book on homicide, like a evolutionary psychologist's take on why
just murder... a little light reading.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It is dense. Like I think it is an actual textbook, but it was from another book that I was reading that I got it. And then it's the same guy that recommended, or not the same guy. Well, I guess it's the same guy that recommended that book, The Physics of Wall Street. Same book. It was like Physics of Wall Street and Homicide. I'm like, oh, all right, I'll check these out. If this is where you're getting your ideas from, I'll see where they come from. And that is really fascinating. It's just very interesting to see like how they stack it up and how they.
Are these the books to like help the psychopathy like take over.
No, no, no. It's really just a psychological outlook of like why would these things happen, and what evolutionary purpose does patricide serve or could serve, type of thing, or filicide or whatever. Clearly, suicide isn't part of that because that doesn't really help serve any direct evolutionary process for the person at the time. And this is the only lens that they're coming at it through. They're not looking at it through like societal factor or whatever else. They're just looking at it like, and I guess societal kind of plays into it because of the evolutionary thing. But it's fascinating, dark but fascinating. It's just like this amount of people, given this age range, are more likely to kill their parents. It's like, whoa, things to note. Keep an eye on my boys. So.
Yeah, really. There was a show, and now was it Mind Killer or something? It was on Netflix.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking.
We watched like
it's the thing where the guy was like trying to figure out what's going on in the serial killers' heads, right?
Yeah, it was actually pretty interesting. It was different than I expected. And I don't remember if we finished it or if I finished it. But I thought that it was because allegedly it was based on like real times or whatever, where they're like, there's evil and there's good. It's like, well, it's a little more nuanced than that. No, there's evil and there's good. There's the bad mob guy and there's the good non-mob guy, right? But like the mob guy isn't the serial killer. The like serial killer is like generally normal in a sense, right?
Yeah, it all depends. I mean, it really it's a fascinating subject to get into that type of like what makes a person tick that particular way, because it's not like they just wake up one day and be like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. It's usually a longer process that gets to that. But let's stick to the guitar and not serial killers. Unless there's a guitar serial killer out there, okay, let's do the research and find out.
I don't know about serial killers, but there's certainly like, are you I think it's Roy Buchanan. Are you familiar with him?
The name rings a bell.
Yeah, you should be. You should go look him up. Amazing guitar player. Played a telly. He would like crank it 10 on everything, turn the other way, turning the amp around, like totally dimed. Really awesome guitar player. Would do wah stuff and whatever. Like he's one of those people who's like the greatest guitar player you've never heard of kind of person. Okay. But he's a legend now. But I guess he was a drunk, and he would end up in jail sometimes. And one time, I think he got beat up in jail or something, like, and died. That's how he died. Or he was hung himself, but like people were like, he probably didn't do that.
Yeah.
there's like
Epstein.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Epstein thing. But I don't know. It's kind of interesting. There's like little folklore things. Well, maybe not folklore. That's the most I can think of as far as close to like killer.
There was another metal band where the guy was accused of murder. What the hell band was it? I wanted to say Born of Osiris, but that's not true. God, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember hearing that.
Like legitimately accused of murder and everything else, and I think he's in jail. I think he did it, or at least was found guilty.
Right.
So that, but whichever. So guitar serial.
All right, go back to guitar. Or other guitar.
Guitar serial killers. I'm putting that in the thing to look up, just to see if there are any, outside of guys that totally kill it with their. Okay, back on the topic. All right, so let's do. Let's see. We got our tube amps dying versus digital because of that article that you sent or whatever.
Oh, sure.
I've never played. Was it the guy that said I didn't? Unfortunately, I didn't like really read it, so I'll just be responding to what you're gonna.
Yeah, the headline, which was, "I've never played a real tube amp before."
Yeah, that is. Well, I mean, I've played tube amp.
When it's like the premise was, hey, I'm a fairly accomplished player, been playing 10 years or something, and never played a real tube amp. So,
like, I'm assuming modern. Like he's not like a.
Yeah, I think it was on like 7 String or one of those like forums or one of those. I can't remember what it was now. or I think it was more like a metal kind of forum. It's kind of like,
I mean, wow, man, that's like, because the digital modeler stuff 10 years ago was garbage. It was awful. So
well, I
like
mean,
solid
XFX
state.
was out 10 years ago.
Yeah, the first one wasn't that brilliant. I mean, it was good, but it definitely isn't the same level of where things are now. Where it's getting, at least to me, it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. But I can't imagine, like, well, that, and you combine it with the idea that if he's first starting out, he's not going to have like this, $2,000 at the time
How do you know?
modeling amp.
There's a
How
lot
do
of
I
people. There's a lot of people like that.
know? That just start out guitar and buy a two
They
thousand
start
dollar.
off with like a Steinberg or like a Strandberg and a XFX. That wasn't you or me, but there are plenty of kids who start that way.
Maybe. I don't know. I can't imagine any parent being like,
But
yeah,
even thinking like Amplitude or something like that, like they could have had those things, or
maybe, yeah. I mean, those are getting there.
or if they said tube amp, so it's possible they had like a Line 6 Spider or something.
That's what I was thinking. That would it was more the direction of. Yeah, I was John would be podcasting for me. No, I'm just kidding. But the like I would consider that to be like he played on solid state amps or maybe like the early modeling stuff, Line 6 and all that those type of things.
Sure.
But nothing like a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier or Subway Rocket or what a Fender Tweed amp or something like that. So I like what was the eventual point of the article? Was you just saying like I've never played this and am I missing anything or what?
Yeah, I think I didn't. It wasn't even really an article. I think it was just it was like a forum post that sort of took off, like a popular forum post. But it highlighted I think there was a lot of people on there that were like, yeah, me either. So then you think the people that that get the neural DSP or this or that, and they say like, oh man, it sounds just like a real amp. It's like, well, did you ever play a real amp?
Yeah, yeah.
And I would suspect that a lot of the people who will say it sounds like a real amp actually never played one. So there's a little bit of that going on probably.
Yeah, that might be a big factor. Like I look at it with that. Well, you can't see it on the camera, but I have my Spark like right over there, and it's a great little amp for what it is. It's phenomenal. I'm shocked at how good it sounds, and it's perfect for practicing. Like absolutely fantastic. And then I just watched a video today on the best tube amp out there. Like Monoprice sells it. It's like a 15-watt tube amp. All legit tube. Celestion speaker for like $225, which is a pretty freaking good, and it has a spring reverb in it. And I was thoroughly impressed with the sound out of that thing, especially for the money. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a great
through your phone on YouTube.
No, this was actually through my setup, not through these, but through my monitors on YouTube. No, I get it. Like I do the same thing. It's like, well, that sounds great through my phone speaker. Why don't I put it in headphones and see what it really sounds like? And I will say this much. YouTube's sources in terms of like streaming music are fantastic compared to Apple Music. Like if I stream something with my Apple Music on iTunes, this might also be a little asterisk on this. It might also be because I'm like only on Mojave and not in the latest versions of Apple Mac OS because I work in audio. So if it's working, I'm not upgrading. I'm not clicking let's update everything. Oh, I just lost everything. That's wonderful. Or I have to pay out the butt for new plugins and everything else. But anyways, so like the YouTube, if you stream the same song from the YouTube album versus the Apple Music one, the YouTube one is like phenomenal in terms of fidelity. Like it's freaking-tastic. And I don't know how what they're doing in it, if it's wave files versus compressed ones or not. But I can clearly hear a difference, like night and day, between the two. No matter what it is, whether it's just vocal music, or a choir, or classical, or metal, or jazz, it doesn't matter. If I pull up the same track, it's 99% of the time much better of a source on YouTube, which is thoroughly disappointing.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny. Like Apple Music and Spotify are so popular, but their sound quality is horrid.
Oh, it's pretty poor. Like I still
even on like the high quality thing, it's really not good.
I am still thoroughly tempted to get Tidal Like I'm just waiting on another deal and doing like the super high end thing. And I wonder if they even have a Mac, a native app on the Mac. That's the big question. Because I don't want, like, I had Spotify on my Mac and it took over, like, everything. In the sense of like it would load itself up right away and you'd just try to make itself default all the time, and I'm like, no.
Was it? I mean, even the standard plan title one sounds 10 million times better than Spotify. It's not even comparable.
You see, I'm just hankering for the gold masters. Like, it's like, but give me the original studio masters, because I got headphones now that can support that. And there's no native app, which is annoying.
I'm kind of wondering about that too. Like, so for instance, I just loaded. I have a new track coming out, or I just had a new track come out in Bandcamp and stuff. Whatever, it's 24-bit WAV file because they let you upload that. But when I went to CD Baby to distribute it, it made me change it to 16-bit. You didn't even have an option.
No, that's annoying.
And I know they distribute to Tidal. So like Tidal's not getting, at least from CD Baby, they're not getting a 24-bit or more higher end thing. So I was kind of wondering, like, well, how do you get, like, if you got Tidal and you got the premium $30 a month, whatever, hi-fi audio thing, like,
how do you get that from an independent artist?
Yeah, how do I get them the right file?
Yeah, because that does make a big difference. I mean, that 16 to 24 is huge, especially if you get decent headphones.
Yeah, I mean, with really good audio system, you can hear it. You cannot hear it on regular stuff or even good stuff.
Yeah, totally.
You got to really, like, you can't really hear the difference. But yeah, higher end stuff. Yeah, and especially, like, I wonder too, the standard is 24-bit 44K. Like, that's like the standard master quality. But we did that test, what was it, a couple months ago, where I sent you the 192K 24-bit versus 48 or something like that. I mean, it's like noticeably deeper sounding and all these kind of
things. Oh, yeah. Like,
and then we're both 24-bit, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I didn't master this record there. For one, the sources weren't that high of fidelity anyway. But if they were, like, how do I get that out into the world, you know?
Well, I look at it like the files that I sent you on the album that I'm doing. Like, okay, here's your 700 meg solo wave files for, like, one guitar. I recorded it with 3 microphones at 192K and edited it in that, and then...
Yeah, so 2 minutes were like 12 gigs. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, or something like that. Well, either way, like the finished exported file, the mixdown was close to 700 meg for a 7-minute song, which is
a lot,
crazy for a solo guitar type of thing. But you know, I definitely like that quality. Don't get me wrong. And then I fixed the issue of finding out how to export it a little bit smaller. It makes it like, okay, good. Now I can use my phone for this rather than having to have it sit down in front of a computer.
Well, I mean, it's also that's another. We should have done that test. We'll have to do that later. The difference between a WAV file 192K versus an MP3 at 320, and just because I've heard from some people, like, it's really hard to tell the difference. But we never try. I think we've done that with like 44K, whatever, and it was really hard. I don't know if you could actually tell the difference, but even with good stuff, if you could, it was so slight. But yeah, compared to 192K, I wonder if we would notice.
I think we'd notice. I mean, especially with the headphones that we both have. It's like, but the problem is like, if we did a comparison on the podcast, it wouldn't matter because, like, by the time we got the podcast source would be so low in comparison to what the actual things are that's coming out of the files.
Well, I was on not on the podcast, but just.
Well, then, sorry everybody, you're not going to get that test. Tim said no.
It's only you have to listen to us, and we'll tell you what we think.
Well, that is true. It is our podcast. Speaking of new stuff, though, that you've mixed down, let's show everybody your lovely designs here.
Which lovely designs? The cup?
Yeah,
Oh, I guess maybe we didn't show this.
we haven't shown this officially on the thing. There it is, folks.
Oh
The Red
man.
Dot physical mug. So it is awesome. I plan on ordering one shortly, just because it's a cool mug. Not that I like the music. No.
The music's horrible, but the mug's
Yeah.
really cool.
Maybe I've just listened to too many of him tweaking it to
Like
appreciate
I can't listen to it anymore.
it. No, I definitely still listen to it. It's cool.
Yeah. So this was it's funny. I've had this artwork for at least like 3 years, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years. I was gonna release an album of like shred tunes or something that I did because I pretty much don't do that anymore. So
I remember that you tried to copy, not in a negative way, but you tried to do like a Satch style tune, a Vi style. Was that the one?
I just had those though. They were like stuff I recorded, so it was kind of like the B-sides. Like I was thinking of it as like B-sides shred album of stuff, just to like officially put it out.
Yeah.
I even did like a Bumblefoot cover, and there were some different things. And at the time, so I had this guy work on the artwork for it, but I never put that out for a lot of reasons. Mostly that stuff should just die, I think. But man, maybe one day I'll put it out. So then, Red Side Visible, this band's, it's kind of it makes it hard to put it in a particular genre. I'm finding more and more.
Yeah, you've experienced
because
that.
it's really pretty heavy sometimes, but it's also kind of silly, and then there's really no bounds on it. There's improvisation, there's saxophone, and there's all kinds of stuff on it. So depending on who you ask, the metal person says it sounds like jazz, and the jazz person says it sounds like noise, and the noise person says it sounds like fusion, and the fusion person says it sounds like death metal, and the death metal person says, so everybody has these. It doesn't fit nicely into anything.
Well, I think that's what makes it good. And, I mean, outside of the good writing, it.
Right. So, well, anyway, that makes this cup suits it. Well, not the cup, but the design of the artwork. So this actually is not probably going to be the artwork for the actual record. Because I have other artwork that's being done by the same guy that's pretty cool. So more cool artwork's coming. Somewhat similar style. In like the greatest mustache on anyone ever of all time. So you can look forward to that. In a similar let's say like comic booky sort of style. But anyway, I've been sitting on this artwork forever, and I'm so glad to show somebody. Like I didn't want to just like put the artwork out too originally, like because I didn't have anything to like.
Oh yeah, of course.
Push it with. And now I'm like, oh, it suits it so well. And I think what's nice is when I start to like promote the record is whoever sees this cover, as it looks, they're kind of prepared a little bit better for what they're going to encounter.
No, I think that the aesthetics in terms of album stuff are really important to an extent. Like, there's something like when we were talking about like going to the music store and picking something out. The album cover was a big draw. Like if you haven't heard the band, you just look at it, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And nowadays, the album artwork is there, but it's so small compared to like a vinyl or even a CD case. I remember the vinyl stuff that my mom had. It was like a poster, and it was really cool to see all the design work on it. And nowadays, there's the branding and stuff like that, and that's kind of cool. But the downside is that since it's so small, you don't get to see any of the nuance and the cool detail.
Even like remember going from tapes to CDs was kind of nice.
Yeah, because the size was like,
the tape was kind of small, and it's like you sort of lost it, but it was still like what you sort of you'd stare there. You remember the days of like staring at the cover, like you'd pull it out.
Yep.
You listen to the whole thing, and you're just like staring at the cover, like you just get transported, because it wasn't like you didn't have your phone to look at or something, so you're just sitting there staring at the pictures. kind of reading the words as it's going on, and you're like, oh, the engineer, and you start to learn the names of all these people and stuff.
Yeah.
You're looking at the band picture or whatever, and
the lyrics, and go, oh, that's what they're saying. So
yeah, that whole experience is kind of gone. But yeah, when we originally made this, when I was working with Ty on it, that's insane with the new artwork that we're working through. It's very much like, this is the kind of thing you would want to put on a t-shirt or a cup. Like, that's kind of what we're going for, where it's just interesting in its own right, and it's cool, and it's not too serious, and it's kind of, I don't know, like I think about some of the great, especially like in the metal world, I think there's a little bit more liberty to do these things. When you think of like Iron Maiden and like Eddie or whatever,
yeah.
and Megadeth had their guy, and
I can't remember what that dude's called.
And so it was kind of normalized to have these sort of characters, Like I look at this little dinosaur on here, like that's like a character, that's a character like that's pretty interesting and cool and and whatever. That you could put on t-shirts, and part of that vibe, I think, like the reason why Metallica and Megadeth and Iron Maiden and all these bands sort of took off too is like, it's not just the music. It was like you could identify the people who liked it based on their stuff they were wearing or whatever. It became like something else. I don't know. So
clicks aren't necessarily bad, but that's how you find your personal taste. It's like, I noticed that if I see another person walking around with a very nice manicured French tip on one hand and nothing on the other, I generally assume they're a classical guitar player. It's like we have our little tells to see what's what. And that's not bad at all. But speaking of which, let's go down this rabbit hole of you putting your music out there and the responses that you've been getting so far. In terms of like the constant, like, it never ceases to amaze me that in some way the genres become like tribalistic of what can potentially be part of that genre and what can't, and what pushes it out. And you have your purists, but then again, how did the genre even form if you have this particular purist idea?
Yeah, sure.
Well, that's not rock. It has horns in it. Well, we need to create a new character, and then they create whatever, ska, and what designates ska, and what pushes something out of ska if they have guitars and horns. Is it the screaming metal thing that puts it back in the metal, or is it the screaming thing? Like using your track as an example, it's like what parts of that forces it out and what parts of it forces it in, just like you were saying with like the fusion guys are like, well, it's missing this and that's not fusion-y, and the metal guys are like, well, it's got saxophones in it and that's not metal-y, and the jazz guys are like, well, it's got screaming in it and that's not metal-y, or that's not jazz-like, and you have like all these people making a call on their perceptions. And now that you're on the receiving end of, I don't even want to say criticism, because I don't think it's necessarily criticizing anything. It's more of a gatekeeper thing.
Yeah, there's a weird gatekeeper thing. So in general, like extremely positive feedback on the tune. I'm very thankful for that. But the issue that I run into now is it's like the people that actually listen to it are very positive about it. But to even get someone to listen to it, is the challenge. And even when you go, like, so I try to think, well, what genre is this band most like? So, and I'll back up just a little bit, because we had talked about this a little bit before, like the Pliny model. Like he was like, why don't you go to the forums, go to the places that people like the kind of thing that you're doing or whatever, and like you start getting in that community and you share it, and then that's like sort of how he built his thing. But his thing kind of fit nicely in this niche. It doesn't really go outside the bounds of that niche. Or is it niche? Is it niche or niche?
Niche. It's either or. I don't know.
Anyway, so it's like when you fit nicely in one of those places, you can say, look, I'm putting out a prog metal album, for instance, which mostly means like it has some kind of odd time signatures, it's metally, It's probably like a mesa-ish sound. Like there's certain like qualities about it that sort of fit that, and it's somewhat Dream Theater-ish.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to have vocals. It can, or it doesn't have to. That seems to be an okay bounds on there. But everything is there's no improvisation in general. It's not acceptable. I'm not sure that horns are acceptable unless it's part of like an orchestra or something. And then screaming may or may not be okay sometimes, but not generally. But yeah, it's kind of like where do you find the lines where you're allowed to go in those areas? So I think go ahead.
Remind me, I have a question for you on that particular thing.
So I think like, well, okay, Red Side Visible has weird time signatures. It's pretty much a metalish thing. There's screaming in it, but there's also singing in it. Yes, there's horns in it. And there is improvisation in it. It's very technical though. So you think it would fit like loosely in prog metal,
Yeah.
Is kind of one of my first thoughts. But then, so I started like going down the rabbit hole of trying to finding like prog metal Facebook groups. And then when you get to them, they're all like very subgenre, like, well, this is prog metal / melodic / this / whatever. And that means it's only these kind of bands. It's this very like little narrow thing. And, or it's like prog metal / death / brutal / something, and it's like, it's only like this. So it's like, well, the people over here are like, well, there's no screaming in this one. You have screaming. You can't post you can't share your thing. It breaks the rule of this group.
Yeah.
And this one's like, you can't do it. You're breaking the rule of this group. And so like, I've had a hard time finding safe havens. And the interesting thing is when I've posted them in these places, I'll get a few people that actually like it first, like it, comment, say something that's cool, and then the admins come in and they delete it. So that happened like 3 times. They're like this, and it says, why did it get deleted? You broke the rule of the group. It has to be death whatever, has to be grindcore, not da 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 da, or whatever, like some, like there's all these like a million subgenres. And I'm like, well, how do you even find like a safe place? So I'm like, well, maybe it's not, prog metal. So it must not fit in that genre and the family of genres. Even though, but then if I go elsewhere, they'll be like, well, odd time signatures aren't really in our genre. And like, yeah. And you were saying like, why don't you put in a Zappa thing? Sorry, one more last thing. And I'm like, well, they don't like screaming or whatever, so they can't put it there. And it has like heavier guitars, so like that's not that group either. So it's like there's all these places that aren't safe for it.
And see, and no, I keep trying to interject, and
go for it. Yeah, go for it.
No, the point that I was going to bring up is like, do you think that the subgenre boom of like this, like it's prog metal, but it's melodic and it's with blast beat, blah blah blah, it's like whatever you want to do to kind of like isolate a particular band or something like that. Do you think that's more becoming more of a hindrance than the bigger just subgenres of like metal, rock, jazz, blues, whatever? It's like, it's great that we have all these little subs of subs, but when you get into the potential conflict of where does this fit? Well, it's like under metal, I think it would fit under the broad thing of it because of most of what's in there. Just, I'm flying off the cuff here. But like, if you keep trying to put it into another subgenre, that's where you kind of like, nope, it's not going to fit. It's like trying to move a couch into a room. It's like, we're trying to like angle it this way and see if we can get it around the corner, or so I'm wondering if that's like almost pushing, as good as that was in terms of being an identifier, now because it's so prevalent with everything and they have their own little, the gatekeepers, so to speak, or not so to speak exactly, that's what an admin is. putting up their things as to what's there and what's not, it doesn't allow any potential new thing to take form unless it falls into X thing, or at least that person's particularly X thing. And that's the other. It's extraordinarily subjective on the admins. It's like seeing that you had positive feedback and then an admin come in and nix it is like, come on. It's not like it's porn on some type of subreddit where it doesn't belong. It's generally in the genre to an extent. So they're just kind of being like, well, no, I mean this. And it's like, I can't help but imagine like some guy with too many Cheetos being like, no, this isn't going in my thing. I'm an admin. Yeah, right. Angry, as I get booted from all these groups now.
I know. I thought it was interesting because every single one that I went on would say, you can do this. We encourage you to post about your band, blah, blah, blah. Like they're all like, we want people to do it. Was generally positive on that front. But then they would say, well, it can't be this. It's like this list of can't be political, can't be humorous, can't do this to that. It's like, well, okay, well, probably gonna get it deleted.
At least they're doing the right thing and just putting it out there, anyways. The worst.
I mean, I can only do so much of that. Because I think it's stupid and sucks when people just like blast post the same exact thing on every place.
Yeah. Yep.
And another thing is when I was looking in these groups. Like, if I went to a group that was prog metalish or whatever, and it had 16,000 followers or whatever, but then everyone who posted a video, like, there's no likes, there's no interaction or whatever, I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time and post anything there because that's not a real group, right? So I was trying to find the ones that actually have some kind of interaction that people are maybe listening or, it's not just like a place where people dump a million videos and they just disappear into the ether.
Yeah.
So, trying to find communities. To your question of like the subgenre thing, I think it's one of those things that's like, it came from an innocent place of just trying to give something a name.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, okay, this has this element to it and now it's got blast beats in it and it's got this. So it's not really the same as this previous version of metal that we had. Now we should call it something else, just so people will know that like, hey, when stuff has this kind of like thing, it's sort of like that. But then it turned like it's like, well, you wrote a name on it, and now you have these like hardcore fans that like protect the walls of that thing or something, and you can't even get to it. So ultimately, I think it's a bad thing. Like maybe we don't need to name all these things. The thing is too is it's like we were talking about this earlier, you and I think it was you and I. But it's like the audience exists. You look at Mr. Bungle and Zappa and stuff, like they have millions and millions of fans. So there's an audience for like, let's say genreless music. That sort of crosses boundaries. There's an obvious audience for it, but you can't get to the audience. It's like a really tricky audience to find. So, and then when you try to go into these little places and you share it to groups you think might like it, if they're preventing you from even sharing it or trying to find those people, you just can't. Like you're just keep getting blocked along the way, and that's unfortunate. So it's like there probably is Bungle fans like hiding out in some of these groups that might, be the type of person that would appreciate this, but they won't even get a chance to hear it. And I get that this is a whole marketing problem too. And I accept that, and how popular you are helps and all these things, so if a famous guitar player put an album out like this, they would have an easier time finding the right audience for it, right?
Really, and it's not even a matter of finding the right audience, just having a bit of fame to get you traction to start with. Like, if you have that reputation out there and you put out something new, it's like, oh, okay, I'll check out a little side project. Like when Victor Wooten jumped in with the Octavision, doing that. It's like I probably wouldn't have given the band too much of a listen originally, until it was like, oh, Victor Wooten's playing Prague. All right, now I'm interested. So and whatever, it became what it was. And so that clearly helps somewhat. Like the name recognition is always something that'll be a draw, regardless of what you're doing. It's just.
I think Victor on that particular one, it was just a session dude.
Yeah, I know, and
but that's like that's an interesting tactic too. I thought about that a little bit, like having someone solo or something on this that was a little more famous. I had a couple people in mind that would have done it, I'm sure. And it's like, well, do you let them do it because the more people will hear it if you put those people on it? But then I think, well, it just seems like cheating or something a little bit. And I know that's stupid because, like, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter? But like, I don't know. It just feels like false advertising to go like hire somebody and be like, look who's in my band. Like,
well, I mean,
really in your band, like they played on it, but they're not in your band. They didn't have anything to do with the vision of it.
Those are the things where it's like featuring X artist. It's like this track featuring blah, and there's a place for that. I think the big thing that, like, the conundrum that you're pointing out is a matter of like, do I do this in order to gain traction versus do I do this because I think this person will contribute something to the song that's going to make it better. And that's really, it can be a both and, it's not a mutually exclusive thing, but that aspect of it happens to be totally subjective to you as the artist, being like, what am I bringing this in for? Am I bringing this guy in because I like what he does and that's going to really compliment it? Oh, and he also happens, the nice thing is he's got like, 1 million followers on Instagram or whatever. So there's a potential of kind of like piggybacking on that. And I don't think that's necessarily bad in any way, shape, or form, as long as it's serving the song to the way where you can continually have your artistic integrity. But if you're like doing this, it's like, well, this is going to totally make you more money, and you're like, okay, I'll sacrifice. Though I like some of his licks, but I'm not totally sold on everything. But whatever, it'll help with the pushing the brand up a little bit, and even like. It's such a weirdly saturated thing in terms of breaking through the noise to get somebody's attention with some type of marketing aspect to it, that it's here's the question: is it artistic integrity to use the potential marketing tools that are out there to bring your artist career to a further place, or are you selling out at that point? Like, take the example of hiring the guy that can do a solo and has a huge following type of thing. Though you might not necessarily like everything that he's doing, you particularly hire him out because his name carries weight and has traction. Like, is that something that?
But is it like? I'm trying to think the right word. Like, it seems like the integrity part of it is weird.
Yeah.
Like, not even about like whether you like their stuff or not. That's almost secondary. But to go like, hey, I made this album and it features so and so, whatever, which is true.
Yeah.
But if you're like being like, look, here's my band, and it has Victor Wooten in it, and it has Jordan Rudess in it, and it has Chris Potter, and like, this is the ultimate band ever. And it's like, well, it's not a band, for one. Like, it's definitely not a band. Because all you did is you paid whatever fee they charged to do something on your record. And especially if, like, all they did was lay a solo out on it. That they maybe spent an hour or two, like, working through and then just recorded it. Like, I don't know. That doesn't mean they're part of your band or whatever. Yeah, so now you're like sort of false advertising.
Well, let's take away from the false advertising aspect of it. And that I agree. It's like if you say, well, they're part of the band, but they're a hired session player, that's clearly like, that's a no. That's a dirty thing to do because they're not part of your band. They're back to play with you. That's it. Now, if you're touring with them that's a little bit different.
Yeah, sure. Or if they like play on the whole album or something.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that. So let me redefine what the question there. Definitely for one track, and it's just a hired come in and do a solo type of thing.
Yeah.
So push it down to that aspect of it only. That you know as an artist that you're hiring this particular person to do one thing on one track, and that's it. And they know that. But the underlying thing that you're also pushing is, well, this guy's got a lot of followers.
Yeah,
and
so I want to leverage their followers and hope that their super fans will go, hey, I didn't know Bumblefoot played on this. And
yeah, exactly.
Like, let me go check it out. Yeah. Even though they might not ever listen to your song, they just listen to the solo and move on.
Well, that's why you put the solo like in the middle of the song.
Yeah, right.
Also, at least sit through 2 minutes before you hear it. Yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Like that. I mean, this is totally what. And I don't know if the classical world's probably a bit like this too. But in the jazz world, if like say I was to sign a deal with one of the bigger jazz labels, they'd probably bring in. They wouldn't let me bring my own band, like not likely, to the session. It would be known names, probably people on their label. That would be the rest of the band. Like this happens all the time. So it's like, oh, this, Chris Potter's on this, and Mark Giuliani's on it. And like they're picking like known entities to play in your group for the record date. And then the other thing that they make, like every first couple jazz records that people put out on the bigger labels, like Blue Note, Crisscross, these, like there will be jazz standards on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to. Like you might write all your own songs, but you're gonna put like all the things you are, giant steps or something on there because that's just like the thing you have to do. So you have some known names in your group, and you can't. It's not like you can be like, hey man, I have this great band in Cleveland. Like that's why you signed me. It's like part of it, and they'll be like, no, you got to use this person, this person, and this person.
Mm-hmm.
And in some respects, you'd be like, well, sweet. Like, I've always wanted to play with those guys. They're amazing. Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of like the reason they do it is for, they know that they'll get at least some people to buy it just because those other people want it. And they don't even really care who you are. Like, and then they're hoping that maybe they will start to care about who you are after they hear you. It's like you can't even get anyone to hear you because you don't have anybody famous in your group. So I get it. I don't know totally how we got to this point, but that's part of it too, obviously.
Yeah, well, it's jumping off of the question. And so it seems to be that the other gatekeepers are the marketing department and trying to get some type of familiar is wrong. Familiar link between their new artists and the greater populace in terms of drawing them in and getting some.
Sure.
Clearly, if you had like a $30 million marketing budget, you could get your name out there relatively.
Well, that's very similar to like the pop world too, right? Like if you sign a pop deal, you get like some famous producer to do it that everyone trusts and likes. You get so and so to guest on your song. Justin Bieber guest appearance or whatever, so you get some traction. I get all that. And by the way, I accept all that, even with Red Side Visible. I know that's a hurdle. What I wasn't anticipating as much is that even at the like lower level like marketing thing, like with a Facebook group, like that you just get blocked out of those. And that even when you're close, like you said, like you would think like tech metal, like prog metal, something, math metal, whatever you want to call it, like it would fit somewhat, maybe adjacent to those things, but it's not like it's like crazy to think that it would fit in those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yet, because of the subgenre thing, you're automatically blocked.
I think that also
you can't even get to those people, I guess is my point.
Yeah. And I think that kind of like draws into the point of like, we were talking way back when I sent you that podcast about the guy who was talking to like academic gatekeepers, and so on. It just seems to be a rehashing thing. Maybe it's just it's also because I'm reading a lot of evolutionary psychology or whatever. But maybe it's just a human tendency to form a particular thing and then gate around it, and
maybe
create some small community, regardless if it's some weird super sub genre of metal, new metal plus math plus screaming only for 30 seconds on a Wednesday,
right.
type of thing or whatever.
And you can't wear white. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's some weird particular thing that has to
No
go
cartoons on your cover. Yeah.
or whatever. And it reminds me of the South Park episode where it goes into the far future and there's warring factions over whether or not somebody eats off of their belly, because like the platypuses have evolved to human consciousness and they're like, they don't eat off of their belly, so let's go fight them. So anyways, and it I guess you could see like the gatekeeper thing happens again and again, and not all of it is a positive result, because clearly something new that is multifaceted in terms of its genre envelope doesn't fit, but it's still got the same parts. It's like you can fit this there and that there and that there, and I think it's really disappointing fundamentally, because we never see advancements happen when you try to put things in a particular genre box and that's it. It's like, nope, sorry, it's got to be exactly like this to fit our thing. And it's like, well, it doesn't really do that. And in one sense, I will say that the academic high tower at least gets you some clout to do whatever the hell you want and still get it out there. Like if I sat on a PhD in a school and did like an album of just the most whacked out stuff that I could possibly think of, just for an example, and I put it out there, I'd immediately get some clout, whether or not it was good, just because PhD was by the name.
Mostly that's true. There is an exception, I think.
Oh yeah, of course.
Well, so. I think you could pretty much get away with writing almost anything you could imagine, which you should do anyway, but as long as it's for orchestral instruments. See, if you bring in distorted guitar with a Marshall half stack, and you bring like a synthesizer and like a drum kit and a bass player and a screamer, like there's a line there that it just seems like as soon as you put like electric guitar in that world, it really is tough to not get shot down by a lot of academics on that front.
From when I was taking some of the classes with Dr. McCarthy, he wrote a cello, or not a cello. He wrote a quartet, I'm pretty sure, that was based off of the lick to the Zeppelin tune. God, I can't remember that.
Oh, from Heartbreaker?
Yeah.
That from there,
yeah. The entire quartet's piece was based off of that lick, and then it was also orchestrated for a full orchestra. At which point they would hire like a local electric guitar player to come in and play that particular lick at that time. Yeah. And it's basically the whole solo, note for note, to an extent. And so I don't think that. And plus, Steve has done stuff with a choir and an electric guitar, which I thought was the craziest thing, because he's like, I had to go out and buy a Strat, and the score has turn the effects on at these particular things at particular times, and it's all these other things to worry about outside of like not wrecking your nails on the steel strings or for an electric guitar and all that other stuff. He's like, I'm playing with a pick. It was the weirdest thing. There were I never did end up listening to those. I should at some point, but they were like totally through composed and everything else. For electric guitar and whatever the ensemble was. And I think that there is some room for it. It all depends, like, at the level of like, I can't see that happening at a Juilliard, but I could see it happening at like a state university pretty easily. And I mean, I guess that does kind of ring true, because that's exactly where McCarthy was, is at a state university level. So I don't. Maybe there is something that once you've kind of like paid some dues, and I'm just waxing poetic, that you get the ability to be like, I'm going to just put this out, and then because I have.
I mean, if you have some clout, you can do anything in a lot of places for sure.
that created a little bit of a circular logic. It's like if you work to get them clout, then you have clout to be able to do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Which gives you clout to do whatever you. It's like, well, maybe, but either way, we're just kind of diving at this point from multiple things of how do you get this non-genre specific thing to be out there without people poo-pooing it left and right.
Right. Well, even before they listen to it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that would aggravate me. It's just like, just listen to it.
Yeah.
That's all. Maybe you can start your own free listening Facebook group. Where it's like you can put whatever the hell you want out there, but it's got to be original. It can't be a cover, and it's got to be your own thing. That's it. They wouldn't have to do the mastering end of it, but the mixing and the recording has to be at least your writing type of thing.
Yes, it's funny. We had Brandon on here, and the place that we sort of got introduced to each other, it started as this. It was called Truth and Shredding or something, and then Chronosonic, and it's multiple names throughout the years of the last 20 years. Mostly led by this one guy, Mark. And there's sort of spin-off groups from it too, but that little community is basically the only music community I've, in terms of a forum or online kind of community at least, where it's actually open-minded, where someone could bring in a country tune or a rap tune or a class, you're just as in those forums and Facebook groups of this particular group, and there's about 50 to 100 people in each one. There's two that I'm part of that are part of the originally from the same thing. You're just as likely to see a country thing as you are to see Shostakovich, as you are to see Coltrane, as you are to see Radiohead. Any of those things are all acceptable. And anybody who brings their own music in is also acceptable. But it's a very tiny community. Mm-hmm. And everywhere else, even when they start with that initiate, they say it's going to be a certain way, it's as soon as the loudest voices come in and they have some opinion about it, it changes the group to where it falls and puts these walls around it. Mm-hmm. And we've talked a decent amount about this, which is it drives me crazy how much people don't even try to sound different. My initial reaction to it is, I guess I feel like when I grew up, if you sounded too much like Kurt Cobain, people called you lame for that. It's that's lame. Why are you trying to sound like that guy?
Yeah.
Or wow, you sound just like so-and-so. That's the lamest thing you could possibly do. You sound just like Hendrix. Why would you do that? That's so stupid. But now, and I don't know if it's because you've got these niches, and maybe that's the problem. It's if you play nicely within that little niche that you're in, then you probably can get some traction in that group. If you fit nicely and you put out a pretty good quality thing, you'll get people responding to it, and you can grow within that community. And you're in a safe place. But if you were to step out of line, especially early on, you immediately get outcast in there. Oh well, you used to always put up the prog metal death stuff, but. Mm-hmm. He had a country bend in the last song. I just don't know if I can handle that.
Why do you buy that telly?
Yeah. You bought it. Yeah. You cannot play metal with a telly. Yeah. That kind of stuff too. Visually, what does it look like? So yeah, I wonder a little bit if the reason why people aren't being as creative is because they're learning that they can't be. Otherwise you get ostracized. I mean, I found that out over and over and over again as a musician, because I will play in the jazz world, and I will play in fusion, and I will play in metal. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you play through all those things, or even classical, play through all those different things, you can get, you immediately lose fans. Because people will be like, man, that was really cool. I didn't know you played that jazz stuff was cool, that you did or whatever. And then they hear a death metal thing or something, and they're like, oh, well, I don't like this guy. I hate death metal. Yeah. So then immediately it's like, well, I don't know what they're gonna do. They don't even know what they're gonna do. So I'm not a fan anymore. Like you're always losing fans like with that approach.
To an extent, I think you're absolutely right. It kind of reminds me of like why I have 3 different albums. There's the singer-songwriter one, the steel string one, and the classical one, kind of all orbiting, but not going to be put under the same release name.
Well, that's a big reason it's called Red Side Visible and not Tim Mirth Project too. It's like I try to keep the Tim Mirth thing like jazz fusion-ish stuff, but mostly jazz-ish. There's like a brand choice for specifically that reason, because I painted myself into a corner by not doing that originally.
Yeah, and I think like you look at it like Keynes from Tool, like he's got Tool, Lucifer, Perfect Circle, and probably other projects I don't know about. But like, you don't go to, it's the same singer, but it doesn't sound exactly. It's totally different as soon as you put on a Perfect Circle versus throwing on a Tool album. It's just, or they're all going to be their unique side projects, and that's kind of the point. And that allows him to have creative freedom and get out there, but at the same time, still have the continual brands that he's set up and plays into it. So maybe that's why it did take Tool 13 years to come out with a new album.
Well, it is interesting though, like how each one of those groups don't really evolve too, right? Like they like picked a sound and then they stuck to it. Mm-hmm. There's a good lesson probably to learn there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're selling a particular item, a particular thing, and you change it, and all of a sudden you lose customers, well, like because they expected X, to an extent. And a lot of these guys, they're running their bands like a business. You have to in order to stay afloat until you're like at superstar level type of thing. And
yeah, most people won't do it then either. That's why it's so rare to find the Beatles / Zeppelin / Radiohead, whatever bands that like were willing to risk their popularity by changing it.
Well, that's like what's the way that Joe Rogan puts it? It's when you have FU money, you're more willing to take the risk. It's like what a radio have to lose outside of like a fan base, but financially they're set for life.
Well, they are now, but like there's a big difference between
I'm talking
Pablo Honey to OK Computers. Like that's like they committed almost career suicide with the Bends or whatever. Like the transition is not linear. Like they were pretty big jumps. So they went to totally different stylistically almost to that. Plenty of bands have tried to do that and failed big time.
Yes, but the question is like failure as in what? Not catching on marketing wise, or totally disbanded and ended up on the street type of thing. Like what's the level of failure that would conduce that? Be something that is like totally wiping them out. Is it like failure is like total fiscal annihilation, or is it failure like losing a certain amount of fan base that would wanted the same thing again, but you kind of like broke the mold? Or is it, I guess it's like, it all depends on how you define it as an artist. I just watched a thing by some pop star. She, God, I can't remember, Natalie Imbruglia or something. I don't know. But like whatever happened to like X artists that had like, their first album sold 10 million copies.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And then like the fourth one sold 13,000, which is like, that's a hell of a decline. And why did they kind of like disappear? And it was just talking about things like that. But I highly would be, I would never go, oh, they were a failure. They might not have kept up with their particular previous success, but if you sell that many copies of an album and have a huge store behind you and you end up going poor afterwards, that's just piss poor management.
Well, I don't know, because...
yeah. I mean, like, seriously.
So almost like no bands on their first record, even if it sells some million albums, really have any money.
No, that's not where I'm driving at with that. I'm talking like with this particular one, she made bank, like
Yeah.
big buco bucks behind the plus the tour too, and bringing in a huge amount of money, and that it's like she's not poor by any stretch of the terms now either. Um, and she's still kind of has like her little moderate niche success thing that's still she's still producing music and doing that. I wish I could remember her name, but I didn't care that much. It was more of a, oh, I'm going to do my exercises now. Let's throw something up on YouTube to kind of kill some time um, while I'm practicing my trills or whatever. The uh, I guess my point with that is like, I think like if you get I know for myself, if I made X amount of money where I didn't have to worry about it again, I would be pushing genres like I wouldn't believe. It's just like, oh, let's try this, and let's try this over here. And maybe that's a little bit of the ADD musician in me. It's like, ooh, that's pretty. Let's do that. And then, okay, let's try and.
That's already what I do. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I just happen to be stuck on a nylon string. The So I think that type of thing in terms of freedom and allowing yourself to develop is one of those catch-22s, because it's like if you want to continue the fiscal success, you got to go back to your pop bands, so to speak. It's like, okay, I got to go back and doing the same like thing to kind of make the money and then go back out again. But who knows? I'm sitting well beneath a developed level at some of these people when they reach those things, so I don't know the intricacies of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it's easy for me to think of how you could lose a lot of money fast.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Say you had that first album with 10 million copies, and the next album was 2 million copies, and the next one was 200,000, and the next one was 10,000 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like that whole time, you had staff, and
yeah,
they all cost money, and if you made 10 million the first time, the next one when you don't sell as many, you're like, oh. And you sell a tenth of as many tickets. Well, you still had to pay people that you thought you were going to sell as many. So it's like, well, where does that money come from? It's got to come from somewhere. And then you keep having these big drops, and it's like it's easy to lose a lot of money fast.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. If it's so easy to do and you have that kind of FU money
mm-hmm.
to just genre hop, why do not more people do it? Like it just doesn't happen very often. It's rare. Like Maynard's kind of an interesting case, but he sort of did it like he hit a lot of things on the mark. He just happened to be right time, right. There's a lot of things that worked for him. He was very popular. Tool got huge, and then Perfect Circle like nailed it in. So then it was like, okay, now we can trust that Maynard's going to put out quality stuff no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you get this, I don't know, there's his brand of himself was strong enough to carry those other things, but at the same time it's not like he's so genre bending like all over the place.
Yeah, I can't imagine him coming out with a country western album.
Yeah. So
who knows? Maybe that's what he's working on now.
That's true. He could.
Listen. Just to say so much about his branding is that if he did something like that, I would totally be listening to it.
Yeah, sure. No, his brand is strong in that you feel fairly confident. One, he's gonna sound good singing. He's got a singing style too that's it's pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like Dio or something like screaming in your face, or it's not
first singer Dream Theater.
It's not. It's almost a timeless sound too, right? It's almost, I don't want to say it's generic, but it's not generic. It's very identifiable and unique in a lot of ways. But it's sort of plain in a way that it doesn't, like, it never sounds very dated. It's like it's not full of like today's cliches versus yesterday's cliches, or like it's a pretty safe sort of style. But anyway, you feel generally confident that anything he sings on is going to sound pretty good, and it's not going to be like so dated sounding or old, or he's never going to be like, wailing or doing like crazy runs or you're not anticipating any of those kind of things.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Christina Aguilera-esque style of vocals came out of him.
Yeah.
But then again, I'd probably pay to hear it. If he said he was going to do it, he'd be like, all right, I'll check that out.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just one of those things.
I don't know. It's interesting. The whole branding thing is interesting, but yeah, the gatekeepers, even at the small level, is a bummer.
Yeah, that's totally. And I mean, I think it'd be worth it. Maybe we should do this. We should do a Wood Air Metal Facebook group where you can post whatever thing you're working on. Doesn't matter the genre. Like, and do it completely open and be like, if people start to complain, we can go like, you don't necessarily have to be here.
I think it only works though if you have a community that actually is involved. Like I said, there's plenty of Facebook groups and forums and whatever where people just post and post and post like all kinds of stuff, but no one interacts with it because there's 3,000 posts a day, and it's like there's no community.
Let's do this. Let me build on this thing because I think this might be a good idea. I think we'll see how. Plus, it could be extraordinarily time consuming, but we could do the Wood Air and Metal Facebook group, post whatever you want, and then being the pompous host that I am, we can sit here and review the stuff like in the podcast, like to do like a 20-minute section of like, this is the X person's music, and maybe not a review, but just play it and talk about it and get it some airtime, just to do it. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be any genre. It doesn't matter. It happens to be an open forum, and we keep it an open forum. It might have to be limited if it takes off, but till then, and limited, I mean, in the sense of like, if there's 500 contributions in a day, it's like, yeah, we're not going to have time to do that.
Well, I think you have to. So some rules that I do like on those groups is like, well, you can't post anything until you've interacted with so much stuff. Like if you're not doing interactive posts and you're not commenting on other people's stuff and checking it out, you're not allowed to post.
I think that's fair enough.
And not just like a couple likes, real quick, but like, you need to talk and discuss and check it out. And, how much do you want to police that? But at least you can ask for it. So if you see somebody just like, I put in like 17 videos a day on there, be like, hey, dude, if you can put 17 videos a day, but you need to write, 20 comments or something.
Something like that. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily gatekeeper-esque at all, as much as it's requiring some skin. Yeah, some skin in the game. It's like you have to at least be contributing something. It's not. This isn't a platform for you to just throw your thing out there and then walk away, type of thing. Of course, the easiest way to get around that is be like, if somebody does that, just don't start discussing the thing. It's like, well, yeah, they kind of left it here and don't interact with anybody else, so we'll leave it up.
Do you delete it? Like, say you saw the same post. Well, say you, because you're in other groups and you see the same post, exactly the same words, just totally copy pasted in 17 other groups, and then they paste it in there. Just basically spamming their post. Do you delete it? You keep it?
I don't know. I would put it.
The problem is you're not going to get any comment. Like, you're not going to get any dialogue.
Yeah, and I would put, like, my first impulse would be like, this has been spammed everywhere, but I'm going to leave it here just because the point is to have some type of an open thing. So, whatever. It might get traction. It might not. Who knows? But it's not like it's taking up any of our particular bandwidth. It's just a post that'll probably get buried if they're spamming.
Well, but it might bury other posts. I guess my point is I wouldn't be opposed, and I wouldn't be opposed from my Red Side Visible, like, pushing stuff, is if it said it can't be a spam post. Like, if you have the same exact post with, like, you can't do that. If you're going to post a video or a song or something, you need to add some context to it. Like, say, hey, this is what I wrote, this is what I was thinking, here's where I did it, some kind of something, so that there's something to talk about. And then also you need to interact with other posts. I don't think that that's gatekeeping. That's not gatekeeping. That's just saying,
No.
hey, we want a community. We don't want just a place that people post a million videos and no one sees anything. Because there's plenty of that. There's no lack of that. Because I could easily go post it on all those places, and maybe I should, but like, it won't matter because no one will actually see it.
Yep. Cool.
Anyway,
all right. Well,
I'll let you take care of that part.
Yeah, I'll work on the Wood Air Metal Facebook forum. Which, I don't know. I think we should start that. Maybe we will in a couple of weeks. Once I'm done with the semester, then I'll have a little bit more free time to do that. Late at night. Anyways, so yeah, I think this is as good a spot as any to kind of end it for today. That and my second COVID shot is starting to make me tired, so I got to grow that.
It is 11:37, so it's not like it's. My second COVID shot, like 2 or 3 hours after, I was like, I feel kind of tired. So I think you're doing better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel. My arm is ridiculously sore compared to the first shot. The first shot I didn't even notice for a couple of days. This is like now it's painful to do that, which is causing me to do that more often because it's like let's circulate this stuff, let's get it going. But whatever. So anyway, are we still recording?
We are, but I could.
Okay, so we could do like. All right, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, and we'll see y'all on the flippity flop.
Ciao.